Thanks for taking some time to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about this Proton AI-3000II. Several episodes ago, a comment was left asking if I had any Proton gear to test. Unfortunately, I do not own any, so I reached out to Ian, episode number 5, and of course, Ian did have one piece of gear, which was this. He even had the remote control for it. I do believe that this came with a set of speakers as part of the bundle, but he did not have those. The only information I could find out about the AI-3000II was that it was made in 1989. It is an AM/FM stereo receiver, an auto-reversing cassette deck, and a CD player. I could find no ratings as to how much power it put out or anything like that, but I went ahead and took it and tested it, and you'll see the data in just a little bit, but I kind of wanted to go over the features on it. One of the things that I've always admired about Proton is they have kind of different coloring for their buttons. They're not all just white on black, and even on the front they have different colorings as well. A close-up view of the Proton AI-3000II. We'll start over on the left. This right here is our cassette door opener. We have our power button here. Here is a headphone jack. We have our tape counter for the cassette deck here, and obviously your cassette controls. We do have the auto reversing feature right there. Also, if you do want to use the tape player, you don't use the auxiliary button over here. You select that you want to be in the tape mode there. You have your channel presets. We have a CD open close button here, and then we do have how you change the display on the CD. Here's our volume control, and this is our function control to select your video in, your phono in, etc. We do have a secret drawer area here where we have a microphone jack with its own record level. We have the different auto reversing modes for the cassette deck. We have our record level for the left and right channels for the cassette deck. We do have separate bass and treble controls, balance controls, Dolby. We have a mono switch, and then we have the auto manual, and that's for recording. There is a loudness switch, and when I listened to it, I did prefer to have the loudness on. And then we have a repeat and a program set up for the cassette deck. So the cassette deck actually has a lot of nice features going for it. So this obviously is the rear view of the Proton AI-3000II, and starting on the right we see our FM antenna coaxial connection. We have our speaker connectors right here, and there are 3-way binding posts which are banana jack friendly. Yahoo! Something very welcome and unusual for a unit like this is a preamp output, which are these 2 jacks here. We also have a moving magnet phono input, and then we have a video input or auxiliary input, as you may. Our 1 amp slow blow fuse hides inside this guy, and we do have one unswitched outlet here. And this is our AM loop antenna connection, this guy right here, which is still intact. And oh yeah, there's a grounding lug right there for the phonograph. So that is the rear of the AI-3000II. So this is the AI-3000 with the cover removed, obviously, and there is a few things I wanted to point out. So we have 2 transformers. One would be for the standby circuit, and the other would be for the power amplifier. The capacitors for the amplifier look to be some of these guys right here, which are 4700 microfarad at 16 volts or 2200 microfarad at 16 volts. We obviously have our cassette here, and underneath this board right here is the CD player. I'm going to come around to where we can see the output stage here. If I flash a little light back there, you can just see the output transistors. There's 4 of them, and they're mounted to the heatsink on the back. As I was unable to find any specifications on the Proton AI-3000II, I had it hooked up to my kilowatt meter here, which allows me to monitor the AC current draw. And based on the fact that there is a 1 amp slow blow fuse for protection on the AI-3000II, I made sure that I never exceeded about 900 milliamps during my benchtop testing, which left me at a rating of about 15 watts a channel into 8 ohms. I am guessing this could do more than that, but I did not want to blow another 1 amp slow blow fuse. For my listening test, I had the Proton hooked up to the two Klipsch KG2 speakers behind me and sat about 9 feet away, and according to my SPL meter, I was hitting peaks in the 84 to 87 dB SPL, which is actually quite loud. The sound was really good. As you saw on the measurements, the 15 watt data on this is very decent, and I didn't hear anything unusual about it. When I first powered on the Proton AI-3000II, I did hear a small pop, more like a little click that was coming through the speakers, but that was very brief and not very loud at all, and I did not hear anything when I turned off the unit as far as thumps or clicks or anything. Overall, I thought the sound was very smooth. Now the tone controls are needing cleaning, as are the balance controls, but that would be kind of expected if you were to find a unit like this, that the controls would need to be cleaned and lubed, but once they're set, they're fine. The cassette deck worked, the auto reversing feature of the cassette deck worked. So the AM/FM portion of this unit seemed to work just fine. Now the CD player did not work. Well, it worked, but it skipped like a record that had a scratch in it. So I would say if you find one of these things, odds are the CD player is probably not going to play well. And maybe not the cassette player, but this cassette player actually did a very good job of playing. And it does have Dolby. It doesn't say if it's Dolby B or C, but it does have one of the two Dolbys in it. I thought it was a very smooth cassette as far as just the way that it operated. Who might want a unit like this? If maybe you have a workshop or a garage where you want like background music and you don't have to like play it over a table saw going off or something, this would probably be a nice little unit for that. You know, if you had maybe a small apartment and you just wanted something for some sound. You know, if you wanted kind of an all-in-one unit and maybe you don't need the CD player because you're going to stream music through the video input and the video auxiliary input in the back, it would be a good choice. As far as the phono input on this, the data showed that the frequency response was not anything I would write home about, but the actual THD SNR looked fairly good. And if you had an inexpensive turntable and you just wanted to be able to plug it in and go with it, it probably would work fine for that purpose. So I would say for the right price, this might not be a bad unit to have for the right circumstance, and it certainly sounded just fine. Once again, I thank you for watching the video, and if you have not subscribed, please do so. And if you had any comments, I always like to hear your experiences. And have a great day or night.
And our first piece of data is the standard THD SNR plot with the Proton putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. And the SNR is 86 dB and the THD is 0.03%, THD plus noise at 70 dB, and a gain of 29 dB. So it actually does not look all that bad. Here we have the frequency response of the Proton using the video/auxiliary input, and the unit is putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms, and it's basically plus or minus a dB below 100 hertz, and then above 100 hertz it looks pretty decent, maybe plus or minus a couple tenths of a dB, and the channel balance is very well matched. So this piece of data is showing how accurate the playback of the Proton A3002 is with playing back a cassette tape with a 440 hertz tone on it. We're basically measuring 434 hertz, so it's doing a pretty good job, at least with this frequency. This piece of data shows how well the Proton is playing back a test tape with a 3150 hertz tone on it. We're reading 3113 hertz, so that's really not too far off, all things considered. Were you to adjust it to make it closer, you would lose the accuracy down at 440 hertz. So all said, this is really not too far off. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for an input into the video/aux port and measuring out at the preamp port, and it's really doing pretty good. The distortion is way low, and the THD plus noise is in the 80s, as is the SNR. So as a preamp, this is not doing a bad job. Here we have the frequency response looking from the video/auxiliary input to the preamp output, and it's looking like the flatness is plus or minus a dB. Once you get to about 200 hertz, it's much flatter. Here is the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz, with the Proton delivering 15 watts into 8 ohms, both channels driven. And you can tell that it is doing fairly well. The SNR is a respectable 87 dB, and the THD is 0.01% and some change. The THD plus noise around the mid-70s. So overall, it's performing rather well. You can also see that the gain is 29 dB. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the phono stage input to the preamp output, and it's really looking pretty good. It's almost 70 dB for SNR, and the THD is 0.001% and some change. That is very, very good. Here we have the frequency response of the phono input to the preamp output, and the left channel is definitely not as good as the right channel. The flatness is about 1.4 dB. From 20 hertz to maybe 100 hertz, it gets better, and then also the right channel is about 0.8 of a dB, and then it gets better at 100 hertz. So once you get above 100 hertz, the frequency response is not too bad. Once again, thanks for watching this episode of Vintage Audio Review.